Hello,
Okay.
welcome everyone. I'm your host, Kua Apara. Welcome to Brainwide Berkeley. And today we have a very special guest, Kissu Taffere. And I want to just welcome you. Thank you so much for allowing me to interview. I want to shout out Sister Almaz for connecting us. It was very serendipitous how this connection came about. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. Feeling a little nervous. I'm feeling good.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for making time for me today. So, I want to kind of just dive right into it because we have a lot of ground to cover. And I want to make sure that you have time to really just express yourself. I want to start with your bio. It's amazing. So, Kissu Taffere, with she, her pronouns, is a first generation Eritrean American immigrant licensed therapist in California and Texas. She is a cross-cultural consultant and writer. She is the proud granddaughter of ancestors who resisted colonization and always made time for 3 finjans, small cups of coffee. She brings deep cultural roots, clinical expertise, and real-world insight to every space she enters. Her professional experience spans refugee camps, international NGOs, community-based nonprofits, and private practice settings across 3 continents. She offers tailored workshops, engaging talks, and case consultations, helping professionals and organizations navigate cultural complexity to improve workplace dynamics and client care. Bless you for that, because how can we do trauma-informed care if our workplace is traumatizing? Okay. Hallelujah and alhamdulillah for that. And then Kissu has also worked directly with POC, refugee, and immigrant communities as a therapist and case manager. She's developed several workshops on burnout and decolonizing mental health. I love that. And she's also an established, published anti-racist consultant, and she does anti-racist approaches to healing collective trauma. And she's also conducted asylum evaluations. Learn more at kissutaffere.com and connect at Instagram at kissu.speaks. That's KISSU.speaks. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, Kissu, I want us to really kind of just, get right into it. I'll say marhaba hafte. I know how to say hafte.
You studied. I love that.
But I grew up with some of my closest sister friends are Eritrean American sisters from the Bay. So as an African American woman, I've always kind of had an affinity to Eritrean women, especially because there's just something about y'all ethos that it really, I just feel very seen and understood. It's just, I don't know, I feel like we just gravitate towards one another. And also, me coming from a Pan African household with Pan African parents, I have found that many of the Eritrean American sisters I meet have this type of like Pan African identity as well. So I want us to get into you, and if you could just start with like, what are some of your nascent memories and experiences that guided you to the practice of psychotherapy and social work?
Good question. I'm gonna start. Cool. If I keep going on and on, you can just signal and be like,
Okay.
um, I think one of the first things that got me really thinking about mental health is professionally, right?
Mhm.
I always think about mental health as a person, but professionally was I was working at the UN Refugee Agency, and it was
Wow.
an Eritrean American or of Eritrean origin, right? And
Mhm.
I was struck by the fact that like several years into my work, I'd only interacted with maybe 3 or 4 people from
Mhm.
um, right my country, my
Mhm.
community,
Mhm.
and in ways that were very like interactions that were very dictated by other people.
Mm,
And so I just remember seeing my own privilege as an American citizen, and then
right.
people who speak the same language as me not having the same rights, being exposed to way more violence and even, torture in their lifetimes. And so that had me thinking about what would it look like to work with my own community directly, and how could I
Mhm.
leverage and use my own privilege, right? American education, American accent, all these things that work to my advantage to support my community. So that's part of where it started.
Okay. That's Can you tell me a little bit more about that though? Because that's kind of a big deal working with the United Nations.
Oh, well, it's funny. The I did. It was interesting. It was actually through the University of Texas at Austin. I thought I was going to do a few months. I was like, okay, I'm going to do an internship. And then that turned into a longer contract, into longer work. It allowed me to go to Uganda for a bit. It allowed me to also go to Ethiopia, to northern Ethiopia,
Oh wow.
as well.
Is that where the Tigray
Yeah,
land
Tigray.
is?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I went. I was able to spend some time in Tigray, where in that particular role, it was to work in the refugee camps where Eritreans are, and I also got to really make a lot of friends and spend a lot of time in Tigray. So I have also a special spot in my heart for it.
Wow, that is phenomenal work. I mean, you have been exposed to just so much diversity. I think a lot of times we speak about Africa like in a monolith, but even within one region or one country, there's so much diversity. And the fact that you've been able to explore and support in the Tigray region of Ethiopia is just phenomenal. When I was there, I tried to go there, but there was like a lot of conflict at that
Yeah,
time, and there is even now. And I really wanted to go because I like wanted to go to Aksum and stuff. But the nuns where I was staying, they like begged me not to go. But
yeah,
I kind of wish I had just went on ahead and went. But anyway, um, okay. So can you tell me more about your private practice, Kisul, and um, the services that you offer, and also as a consultant for other providers? Can you tell me more about
yeah.
how
Sure.
people can reach you if they want to reach out to you for services?
Yeah, I provide, so I do wear multiple hats. One of the hats that I wear is doing therapy directly, and I have a specialty or particular focus and interest in working with immigrants, children of immigrants, and also I think people who identify as being between cultures, right? Or being between identities, right? And that may look like being a child of an immigrant, but it also might mean like you've moved to a different country and you lived there for a long time. What does that mean for you in terms of your identity or coming back? Uh,
Mm,
so that's one area of my work. And so I practice in California and Texas, and then another part of it is focused on, providing consultation, right? When people are working with clients from different cultures than their own, or even honestly, even within your own culture, right?
right.
How does culture, your understanding and relationship to culture, impact how you work with someone else and their identity, right? And culture. So consultation, I provide supervision to
Good.
MSW interns or people who are doing
Come on.
deployments, and
Go
then
ahead.
clinical advising.
Come on, supervisor. Yes, I love that.
I don't have the official like the 2 years to supervise. That's next on my, but it's something that I really enjoy is supporting that because I've really not always, but the times that I've really benefited from clinical supervision, like I still keep in touch with my clinical supervisors. So um, on that path, but that's that's more or less what I do. My elevator pitch is like from the first floor to the 10th. It's really long, but
No,
it's
I
a whole
love
building.
that. It's,
But
it's such a journey. I watched my mother go through that journey. She's a licensed clinical social worker. And, there was one time when she had gotten almost all of her hours. and then she got laid off. And then I can't remember what happened, but somehow her hours expired. So
No.
she had to start all over from square one. And I just remember being her cheerleader and just saying, well, you just got to do it, mommy. And she started all over and she did it. And she passed her clinical exam. And that was very arduous and a journey. And I'm just so proud because I know how hard it is to get that. So I'm proud of you.
Oh, thank you. Thank
I'm
you.
very proud of you. Um, Kissu, personally, you are the first Eritrean American therapist that I've ever met. So I wanted to know what inspired you to pursue that. And did you grow up seeing Eritrean American therapists? Is that just
No.
something that was modeled for you?
No, I didn't see any therapists, to be honest, growing up. I saw Dr. Phil on TV.
Right.
That's about
He's
it.
betrayed us.
When he was on Oprah yelling at people.
Right.
Um, sorry, Dr. Phil. Anyway, but no, that's what I remember. What got me, I think it's really similar to what I had shared earlier is also my own personal, right, relationship and struggles with my own mental health, right?
Mhm.
And it's not, I didn't connect the dots of how, you know, migrating or moving to a different country at a young age, losing a parent, right, at a young
Oh,
age.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Or, just like what we talked about, like, right, conflict between our countries, right, where in one phase of your life your identities, you're the oppressed, identity, and then another part of your life, your identity is also perpetrating violence another against another group. So there's ways in which trying to make sense of all of this
Mm.
takes a toll on your own mental health.
Yes,
So
it
part of
does.
it was my own, like, struggles with my own mental health, but then also seeing goodness, right? And we're not the only community, right? Obviously, but when you start seeing I remember seeing reading a book, and one of the authors said, "Oh, like these people are so hot headed." Back then, I was like, "Yeah, yeah, we're hot headed." And then later, now I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute, does she
Right.
collect trauma?" Right? Like, so there's this also
Mhm.
realization that when you start seeing things not only through a mental health lens, but when you add a mental health perspective to it, that it deepens your understanding um, of like your own individual experience, but also the experience of your community with all of its diversity. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's
It
kind of
does.
an amalgamation, like a mix
It
of.
does. Yes. And just sometimes you trail off a little bit. Make sure you're speaking yes the whole time, just because I just want everything to be clear.
Yes.
Yes. So, do you mind if I ask how old you were when your parent died and which
Yeah.
parent
Well,
it was?
there's another funny story about my birthday, but I'll keep that. That
Okay.
was, I was 8. I was 8. So I was pretty young. Yeah.
Bless your heart. And was it your daddy?
Yeah. It was my dad.
Oh, I can't imagine. I just lost my dad 3 years ago and I'm still
Sorry.
coping with it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bless you though. Do you have you have memories of him?
I do. I have. I do. Memories, maybe some shared traits. He was the type to be vocal in
Okay.
meetings and sometimes get escorted out. There
Is
was
he a Scorpio?
yeah, must have been, or like, you know, back to the maybe we were a little bit hot headed, a little
Right.
opinionated, but yeah, some pretty fond memories and a few embarrassing ones. Like, oh my god, not in this meeting. Just be quiet.
Right. That's so sweet. And what's his name?
Taffere.
Oh, yes. Y'all take y'all
We
daddy's
do.
first
We
name as the
yeah.
last.
We
I
put
think that's so beautiful. They do
yeah.
that in Congo too. That's nice. Um, well, he made a beautiful daughter, him and your
Thank
mom.
you. Thank you.
Okay, so I like that you start with your own experience personally. I live with mental health conditions. I'm very open about living with major depressive disorder and other things as well, PTSD. it can really impact us in our everyday lives. And I think that as Black women, we're often told that we need to like be strong. And sometimes being strong is preventing us from getting the help and support that we need. And there's also strength and weakness. You know, it's okay to say, I need help, I need support. Growing up with a father, may he rest in peace, Muslim father on my dad's side, Christian mother on my mom's side. My father, he lived with substance use disorder because of a lot of the adverse childhood experiences he was exposed to. And a lot of his addiction really was about self-medicating. Okay. But he eventually became clean and sober and lived a life of recovery, which was which were some of the best years of my life. And I think my father, I learned, you know, I kind of grew up in AA meetings going with my dad. And I learned that there's so much power in disclosure, to be honest. There's so much power in just saying, yes, I live with a mental health condition, or yes, I have my own struggles with mental health, because you can free yourself from it. And then it also promotes visibility, because a lot of times we think that, oh, this person's so strong, they're so this, they're so that. And we think they could never have certain things going on. But the truth is, many of us do at least. So thank you for just being so vulnerable and sharing that. So today's interview is really a conversation for both providers and individuals navigating mental health outcomes in a very broken system. And what also seems like a broken world, especially right now. This interview is really meant to be a living archived tool for people to use as guidance, inspiration, and most importantly, hope. So before we delve into the niche questions of today's interview, would you mind sharing with us, Kissu, why supporting immigrants with improved mental health outcomes is relevant?
This is such a good question. And I had a hard time coming up with an answer because I've always operated under the assumption that it is relevant without reason.
Right.
Because so many of, I'll say so many different identities, there's a need, whether it's grant applications, whether it's applying to programs, whether it's licensure, to justify the need. And I know that's not your question, but the reason that I struggle with an answer is almost, why not? Right.
Period. I love that.
Why not? Right. We're people too. Right. And I think that's reason enough. There are other reasons, of course, right? In social integration, right? Communities being able to get along, particularly when there's like different histories, different value systems, maybe like all the job opportunities, all these things. And I think going several steps back from that, that's your neighbor, that's your parent, that's your sibling, yeah. So it's almost, why not?
I love that. I think we spend so much of our time as people of African descent justifying our existence, justifying our worth. I see this in many communities of color where we feel the need to justify our right to be here. And so I really love your response. Why not? I mean, it reminds me of Sojourner Truth when she said, "Ain't I a woman?" It's like, I'm human. Why not? Why do we have to justify everything? I mean, it's a human right, right? And thank you. That was lovely. Um, so again, the immigrant community is not a monolith, obviously. It's so diverse with representation from all continents, religions, classes, languages, abilities, and gender expressions. And even with such difference and diversity, there are still certain practices that we can incorporate as providers or caregivers to be more inclusive and affirming so that persons who identify as immigrants feel more safe or edified or just seen when seeking services. What are three practices that you can recommend in this effort?
Three practices. I have a few notes because I was like, gotta narrow it down. But I think that the three that stand out to me, one, and you already did this in sharing this question, is the acknowledgement of diversity. And I can share a little bit more about that. The second one is curiosity about culture,
Yes.
and that's a learning process for me, for Upright, as well.
So you said curiosity and not assumptions.
Curiosity about culture, not assumptions about culture. And then the last one is also curiosity about what helps. So those are the three practices. I think particularly they feel connected, but when I think of acknowledgement of diversity, sometimes what happens is we might, even in saying we, right, but that collectively that there's a tendency maybe sometimes to see a group as a monolith. So there might be, I'll speak for the country I come from, but there might be Eritreans who have arrived through the border. There might be people who have had really dangerous journeys. There might be people who came here on student visas to work on their PhDs. There might be people who came on marriage visas. So I think sometimes it's not to disavow or minimize the trauma and like what's the experience maybe of an overwhelming majority of people who've entered the country in the last 20 years, right? But there is something sometimes that feels reductionist and even hurtful when we don't acknowledge the diversity. So I think that's where the curiosity, respectful curiosity, right? And responsible curiosity, right?
Right.
That even within a group, people can have such diverse experiences of their own culture, but then also their own immigration.
Yes. Tell us, this is kind of off script, but can you tell us a little bit about Eritrea? Because I think a lot of people may not just understand the cultural richness and the kind of political situation. Do you want to give a little background?
I can give a little background. There's a lot of, so it's a country that gained independence in 1990. Oh, see, referendum was 1991, and I believe it was recognized as an independent country in 93. But either way, early 90s independence. And before independence, it was under rule by the Ethiopian government at the time, and then before that by the Italian, by the Italian under colonization. And so it's a really long history of colonization, quite a bit of conflict. But that's the big picture, right? But within that, a rich, right, culture of community, of interdependence. Wonderful food. Ethiopian Eritrean food are very similar, lots of spices.
Right.
So
Food is the bomb.
Food is amazing. And then I think, recently, and I'm nervous even saying this, but I think it feels important to say, I think recently in the last, 20 years, 30 years, that, the government has been increasingly repressive. And so that's been a lot of people fleeing the country. Now, a contentious issue, right? Some people say, no, that's not the case. That's, so it gets very political and inherently political, I think. That's sort of the current situation. Beautiful country. And yeah, I think that's a brief, very brief summary of Eritrea.
I love that. And can you let me know if when y'all got your independence from Ethiopia, was it the Derg government that was ruling at the time?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that government was pretty oppressive even within Ethiopia.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Thank you for that. It's important just so we can kind of center ourselves. Um, now, oh yes, now we're going to really get into the questions. So this next question is titled "Grounding in Crisis." So, as a therapist working with Black immigrants from the African diaspora, what grounding techniques or practices do you recommend for clients navigating the trifold dynamic of displacement, cultural bereavement, and systemic racism often encountered in America or Europe, anywhere? I mean, even
Yeah.
sometimes in Africa.
Similar to the last one, I think so many things, right? One that comes to mind particularly is culture, right? What
Mhm.
are the rituals that connect people and culture, right? Because I think we can anyone who's ever moved can relate to the experience of, even going to the coffee shop next door is its own ritual. So I think uh,
Mhm.
whatever that ritual of connection is, right? That's culturally connected or culturally rooted. But what is that ritual? Um, and can that we can't always replicate, but can we connect to some aspect of ritual that has served a function and a really important one? Another one is people, community. Now I know community is also not neutral. Some people are safe, some people aren't safe, and there's also this um, the complexity of where even people are on in terms of their political views, right, about their home country or or where we are now, right? But I think
Mhm.
where community is safe, or where parts of community are safe, which people can we connect with. And then the last one I think is faith, whatever that looks like, right? Whether it's Orthodox Christian, Muslim, um, what is that? Or maybe it's not specifically tied to a formal organized religion, but there is some sort of faith. So those are the three that, I don't want to speak on behalf of the whole nation, but I think from my own
Right.
experience and the work that I've done with people that resonate and stand out.
Well, I think I'm glad you brought up faith, to be honest. I will say that I have been working with for the last year. I've been doing facilitating workshops at this place called Piedmont Apartments. And it happens to have a lot of Habesha, like Eritrean, Ethiopian immigrants, and also African American. And the workshops are open to everyone, but it's mostly women who come. And I've been facilitating these amazing, just they're almost like ciphers with elders of the African American and Eritrean and Ethiopian community. And it's just women coming together, talking a lot about bereavement, talking a lot about feeling like systems have failed them. Obviously, that goes without saying for the African American experience, especially for elders who really were the ones fighting for us to have all the rights that we have now. And then also just dealing with loss, like violence.
Mm-hmm.
I know that one out of every three soldiers in Eritrea was a woman, in terms of the independence war. And I know that um, it's not unheard of for Eritrean women in the diaspora to have dealt with a lot of loss, like death. And for African American women in Oakland, that's also very common. So a lot of the women in this group talk about losing husbands or brothers or their sons or daughters. And what I've noticed is that faith is a big one because sometimes we cannot afford to get therapy, or maybe our insurance lapse, or maybe we just can't find a provider that we feel safe with. I know that happens a lot with me. Like, I really need a provider who I feel safe with. And so a lot of these women have used faith to get them through. So I love that you said that. Um, my next question is entitled Navigating Identity in a Hostile Climate. So many African immigrants face a shared struggle of suddenly becoming a minority. upon arriving to the US or wherever else they are outside of Africa. How do you help your clients navigate the complexities of racial and cultural identities within the US? And especially when considering how the US quote unquote racial structural model does not necessarily exist in Africa.
That is a good question. I'm trying to think which part. The first thing that comes to mind is that when people are come to the US from different countries, different regions of Africa, they're coming in with their own it's not race, right?
Right.
But there's colorism.
Yes, there is. It's
There
that.
there is ethnic identity, right?
Yes.
Which again, it's not the same structures and systems as race always or necessarily, but there are aspects of someone's identity that maybe render them more privileged in whatever part of Cameroon they're in. And then when you come to America, and I can speak from my own experience, you get to America and we're all Black, right? And that is that's a learning curve. That that is a learning curve because I think people, there's internalized anti-Blackness.
Yes, there is.
There's a disavowal of Blackness. There's also racism within, right? And then there's that tension, right, between not understanding the sacrifices and the history and the struggles of the African American community and how that had paved the path and made it possible for different immigrant communities to come to the US and have access to the same rights. Well, have access to key rights. I won't say it's equality, but have access to important rights. So I think for me, I struggle with that with working with clients because I also don't want to. My job isn't to necessarily. It's to share information, but it's not to teach in a patronizing way.
Right. I like that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think it's a hard one. I mean, I can share because we all love Sade. There's a lyric in one of her songs where she talks about, she says he didn't know, she's speaking, I think of, I don't know if it's her father, but she's speaking of an immigrant, Black immigrant who he didn't know what it meant to be Black until they changed, but didn't want to touch his hands.
Oh, you just gave me goosebumps. Stop. Oh, I just got goosebumps. I remember when that album came out. Every girl at Oakland Tech was
right.
What? That Soldier of Love album.
Yes.
There's something right there.
I think that's the lyric, honestly, that I hold on to, that is part of people's like evolution or formation of their own identity and their own relationship to their own Blackness has also so much to do with their own pride, their own accomplishments, but also their own very private moments of encountering racism.
Yes. It is such a private moment, isn't it?
It is. Sometimes it's the seemingly small, like, interactions that bring up so much of that history. Yeah. Or that pain.
Oh, yes. I've never really considered the privacy factor of racism, but it's true. When you experience it, oftentimes you are alone. You don't really have a sounding board to be like, is it just me? And so that kind of adds to, I think so many times as Black people, we're not sure if it's just us experiencing this or experiencing certain things. And so I have a real big issue with gaslighting. I have a big issue with gaslighting. It took me forever to finally understand what it meant, but I'm like, oh, I know what that is. Like I've been feeling that all my life, you know? It's just this way that our experiences are dismissed and minimized. And I will say that I feel social media has really helped to advance the truth
Mm-hmm.
of our everyday struggles with private experiences of racism. But these are things that we've always known.
Right.
But it's, I think also the privacy factor kind of enhances the shame when I think of bad things that have happened to me in private, that my mommy didn't know or my daddy didn't know if someone was like violating me in private. It just adds to the shame of it. So experiencing any type of ism, it can really create cognitive distortions, to be honest.
Right.
And that's something that I'm really getting into liberation psychology. I really love that branch of psychology. It's helping me to just not take so many things personal. You see what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right. Right.
Um, okay, so let me see here. Uh, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, you've kind of already touched on it, but talk a little bit about you yourself and any cultural bereavement you may have gone through when you came here as a little girl.
Well, let's get the Kleenex. As a as a little girl, what's interesting, and it connects to what the question you asked previously. Sometimes you don't know. I didn't know what I was losing
Mm,
until I was in my 30s, or as I was in my
like,
mid 20s, right? Because when you're, and I'm always trying to balance between speaking from my own experience as an immigrant and then collectively. So bear with me because it's so personal, but there is a sense of when people arrive to the US, when you're new, like the ideal is, like, maybe that's changed a bit now, but there is a need to idealize being in
yes.
the, because what was the sacrifice for? And particularly for people who take really perilous journeys, and you're coming through Panama. The more perilous the journey, the higher the stakes. It needs to be real. That dream needs to be real, right? And
Mm,
so there's no room for grief in that, or at least there's no room to acknowledge and feel that grief. Um, but I think my experience is, I think when people are, it's not even, sometimes it's a question of time, sometimes it's a question of like really impactful experiences, but there's some reckoning that happens of what what price have I paid? What,
ooh,
but and I remember reading, and I can share it with you. There was a really great article by, I think, an Iraqi American. Um, I don't know if they were a doctor, but they were a really great article.
mhm,
And one of the things they talk about is when you start counting the numbers of how many times are you going to see a relative in your lifetime?
mm,
How many times are you going to have to miss a funeral because you can't leave the US? And of course, right, with the current, that's always been a challenge, but I think more acutely with the current administration, what's happening with immigration enforcement, there's real risk and sacrifice. So I think for me, that grief actually, it's almost the opposite of the grief lessening. I think for me, and sort of what I've seen with friends or family, is that it intensifies in a different way, and it's a different kind of reckoning with what it means to have either chosen to come to America or to be brought to America.
mhm,
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I think it can get pretty heavy, but I also think it's a rich way to experience life and relationships.
mhm,
Always there's a certain amount of, I think, appreciation and depth for family or some family members
mhm.
with that. Yeah.
Did you come through Panama?
No, I came straight into what was that? George W. Bush International Airport.
Okay, you a
It
Texan.
was
I
the most,
love it.
yeah.
I
I mean,
love it.
playing everything. So yeah,
Right.
but even and I think there's also that additional layer of like, I'm glad you asked that because I think there's also that like, oh, my experience was so easy, truly. Like
Mm,
to others, privileged. You flew on a plane. You came with either with your family. I didn't experience extreme amounts of, I mean, family separation, relative to others. And so then there's also that like, um, am I allowed to grieve? Right? I think
right,
but, but you didn't have to experience the same things that others did. And so I think also recognizing that there's different, it doesn't have to be extreme trauma to be
right,
worthy of grief, but there's also like respect for um you know that I'm not only centering my own experiences and my own sense of grief over um others
right,
who may and are experiencing
right. No,
the same.
I remember I worked with a family from Kenya, a Kikuyu family, and they were my clients, and they had two daughters, beautiful family. But everyone was going through a severe chronic depression.
Mhm.
Even though they got set up with like an apartment and everything, in a nice part of the Bay Area, they were deeply sad. And, they came here, they got like a visa to come here kind of seamlessly, if you will. But what they were explaining to me is that what they gave up can never be replaced.
Mhm.
In a totally different lifestyle. So Kikuyu people are, traditional Kikuyu, they work the land, they work with the farm animals. They're like workers of the land. And to leave behind their wealth, their like rich land, and to come here, it was just so different. And then their daughters kind of start rebelling.
Mhm.
And so that is one thing. And then I've had I remember one of my friends, an Eritrean American friend, his cousin was kind of like taken hostage in Libya, and
Mhm.
like supposedly put in this, those like shipping containers. And so the family had to basically pay ransom so
Mhm.
that he could continue on his journey to try to get here. And then I had another client, and I'm just sharing these stories just to illustrate, like you said, just how diverse the different experiences coming here can be. And what you said about the cost, that's such a deep question to kind of grapple with, right? I had a client from Central America who was so sweet, and he wanted support for his younger brother. But he happened to share with me his coming to America story. And he was saying, like, in El Salvador, a lot of people had to come just because of the political unrest, a lot of it perpetuated by the CIA, School of the Americas, and all of
Oh,
that stuff.
they're gonna be watching you.
You said what? You said they're
They're
gonna.
gonna be watching.
Yes, well, welcome. Hopefully they can learn something. But he was saying, like, one, it's very expensive. I think a lot of people who don't know just don't understand. Like, it's thousands of dollars.
It's
Like,
very expensive.
it's very expensive. It's cheaper to come on a plane. When
Right.
you have to come on foot, it is thousands of dollars. And this young man was just sharing with me that I think he was around 8 or 9 when his father brought him here, and they were with like a caravan of people, and his dad had to go get food. And so he asked two men to like watch his kid. He would be right back. He was looking for food. And then he said, and the hour that his dad was gone, he was sexually abused by those two men, and he was given cocaine.
Mm.
He
Yeah.
never shared this with his father. But he was just saying how there's so much trauma oftentimes when you have to come here uh, through coyotes, is we say in Spanish, but people who kind of like usher or third parties. So cultural bereavement is something that I think I just recently was introduced formally to the term maybe 2 years ago, but it's something that I feel a lot as someone of African and Native American descent who has had no choice but to, thankfully, my parents bless my twin sister and our younger sister with a lot of our culture, but we have to search it and get it. A lot of we have our roots, thank God. We're from the South, so we have all of that intact. But a lot of our traditional African heritage was systemically taken from us. So whenever I learn more about my African identity, there's a sense of cultural bereavement. Or whenever I learn more about my Eastern Band Cherokee ancestry, there's a sense of cultural bereavement where I'm happy that I gained it, but then I'm like so saddened that it was taken from me. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it's just culture, especially, I mean, and there's goods and bads, not to make a dichotomy, but
Right.
culture, it's rich.
Right.
And the grounding pieces of culture, like I need it. I need it.
Right. Right. I really appreciate you sharing that. A a thought just slipped my mind, but I think I was going to share I had this recent experience where someone mentioned casually just driving by, "Oh, that was the hospital where I was born." And just like you said, it's not explicitly culture, right? But it is
Right.
related to like um rootedness and land and place and uh, yeah, I felt a wave of that. I felt jealous, to be honest.
Right. Like, wait, keep it real.
I felt jealous and I felt sad, and I think when one of the things that I have from I've only visited once, but a relative gave me back to Eritrea, but a relative gave me like kind of this, I don't know if it's a stone, but it's like sandy. It's from it was from a church or a holy place, rather, not a church, but a holy place. But I still keep that with me. So there is this like, I tend to be very pragmatic. I like, no, I don't do that stuff. I'm very, but which
That's
is
your
also its
daddy
own
in
source
you.
of denial, right? Like its own source of like, I minimize the things that might be, you know,
Hmm.
but there is something about, yeah, about when you say cultural bereavement, it's also about soil. It's about place,
Yes.
land. Um, yeah, yeah,
Connectivity is true. It's about touching.
yeah, it is.
I went to college with this beautiful girl, Eritrean sister named Layla. And she used to always tell me, she was like, look, she was like, back home, there's no such thing as mind your own business. She's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
if you're depressed, people gonna be in your house, like, come outside. What's on your mind? Like, and she was just saying how it's just so much more touchy-feely back home. And here where we're kind of like isolated and da, da, da. So I'm a very like tactile person too.
So,
So just being able to touch land or anything, I need that,
uh,
especially because in America, I don't, people are like, I love everyone, but a lot of my friends over the years have like allowed, they've changed, like you get so indoctrinated with just this sterility and it's
right.
like, no, I need to hug you. I need to embrace you. Like, I just need to feel you. So I hear you with the stones and anything that's touched, it helps me feel more grounded.
Definitely.
Um, I want to ask you this next question. We're currently, this one's called Emotional Toll of Political Change, right? And I feel like as African people, there's always something going on in the background. But currently, we are witnessing heightened anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies targeting African and other immigrant communities. What psychological impact have you personally observed among your clients who identify as immigrants, and how do you help them to cope without minimizing their fears or concerns?
Hmm. That's I think coping is a difficult one. And I'm speaking not just of now, but like I'm thinking of past, right? The past 8 years, but also in particular the first, right, Trump administration. Particularly when there was, I don't even need to look in the past, but I can talk about the present. But I'm offering that's kind of maybe where a lot more of my client work was
Mhm.
directly with people who were um, more exposed immediately a threat, but also now. Um, I think coping is hard, right? Like I have a complicated relationship with coping skill.
Mm.
I think I defer to my clients on coping.
Okay.
Um, and not to say not to say, oh, you're experiencing insomnia, you can't sleep, you do you, that's great. But how is coping? How is something as like something like sleep hygiene? How is that contextualized? Is it the problem is you're not sleeping, and so let's work on some coping skills? Or is the
Mhm.
problem there's a really there is a violent government that has pursued
Mm.
you from wherever you came, if that was your experience, and that's happening again, and that's triggering. And um, what does it look like to survive? So I think coping, it is the language we speak, right, in social work and
Right.
like healing professions. But I think, yeah, coping for what, right? Coping in service of what? So I think coping to survive. What does that look like? Why is that what you need in this moment? Um, but sometimes I have to say, like, it's tricky because I've also worked with with parents, for example, who are separated from their children. Why would I want to sleep? Why would I want a night
Mm.
of sleep when I don't know if my children are going to be abducted? Why would I have 3 meals a day? And so I have it's not, it's a balance between, I don't want to problematize
Mm.
the response, but at some point it's, well, what's best for your children? Do your children need a parent who's going to be alive in 6 years when they reunite with you? I'm thinking of particular clients I worked with. And
Mm.
so, yeah, coping for what and for whom feels really important, but coping on its own can feel inadequate, can feel invalidating. Honestly, I don't have an answer. I struggle with it because if you're working at an agency or a nonprofit or even like, I don't know, a hospital, and you like the measures, the progress notes, all of those things want deliverable coping skills. The
Right.
workshop, right? I won't. The workshops that a certain donor wants you to do, coping skills, right? But the reality is, it's one tool, and it's not always what resonates with people. It might be what I need in that moment, what might benefit me, but it may not be what's most resonant or what's meaningful. And I think sometimes I struggle with that one. I don't know. I don't have a clean answer for it, but I think it's a real thing.
Well, I like it because this kind of goes back to your experience in decolonizing mental health. And I like how you interrogated that question and you made it just, how can I say, culturally humble or relevant for, because a lot of the language that we use, it is outdated or it's not like you said. It's like, how can I have a client eat 3 square meals when they're worried about where their baby is. Or, we have so many children in detention centers right now.
Mhm.
So it's just kind of like we have to be aware and mindful of just like, I like how you had mentioned earlier about you try not to be patronizing in your approach. And it can be patronizing to recommend coping skills without a certain base level being met, right? Like people need to know that their people are going to be okay. That's real. And so I appreciate you for saying that. I want us to talk about community and healing, and what role do community-based practices play in the healing processes for African immigrant women? And are there specific traditions or community structures that have proven especially effective in fostering resilience?
I can speak to maybe a little bit of an acknowledgement that growing up, right, immigrating to the US, as a young child, I sometimes I say I'm 70% American, right, in my experience, and 30% East African because I'm not as deeply embedded in the community and community rituals as
Mhm.
I would have been had I even immigrated here when I was 15 or 16.
Right,
And
right.
so I want to be mindful of when I share, I'm not sharing as like an ambassador for, for a whole continent, but maybe for what I've seen, what I've known from my own family, from people I've worked with, from clients. I think um like in a lot of the work I remember doing with some colleagues in Oakland um was around communities where people are gathered, right? And that's it. And it could be a dinner, it could be an event that a church is organizing. Um, so it really, I'm saying this with a smile because I remember like, okay, like, and it wasn't that deep. It was just people getting together. Often that was, but there was a part of my training and education that was like, we like really intellectualizing it. And not to say that also doesn't have its place, right? But that's what I think when you ask that question is just people together and and then see what emerges. I think, yeah, people with shared identities or with shared experiences. Those are the gatherings that I remember. And I think um, when I think of my own family, which I'm not really a good dancer, unfortunately, but that's another, I can pick that up in my own therapy. But um, it's been gathering and dancing and eating and sharing stories, you know.
Oh, I love that. I love dancing myself and eating. Um, so classism within and outside the community. Immigrants often experience class-based discrimination both in the workplace and within broader communities in America. How do you help your clients navigate this tension, particularly those who may have held higher social standing in their home countries?
Ooh, classism. Yeah, I think how I kind of I didn't go into the work thinking classism, how are we going to address this? It's always through the missteps, right? Um, Something about this really small interactions that, you know, that make sometimes people feel, oh no, like that's not who I am. This is what I had in my home country. This is who I was. Um, and so I think or coming and then coming to the US and maybe taking on jobs that where there's more exposure to violence or fewer rights or just disrespect, right? And I think reminding people, sometimes we do forget. I think reminding people of their dignity, like my um and it sometimes would be as simple as you don't wait until somebody is struggling with an intake form to say oh, are you illiterate? Right. I don't know that, but there's something about being proactive about as much as we can in remembering that people don't need to be saved. Often people have had really rich lives, and rich can be a really nice house, but rich can also be two cows. Rich is relative, but I think people come with their own richness. People also come from poverty, right? But people come with whatever their own idea and conceptualization and experience. And so I think also for us expanding our own understanding of what it means, because there is almost a looking down on for people who come from rural settings, for people who don't have who even the way I'm saying it, don't have formal education, whose education is not within like institutions in big cities and capital cities, but there's so much education. So that happens. So I think that's kind of my when I hear you ask that question, that's my thought of just holding that people have dignity. And so what does that look like for them when I think of classism?
Yes, I love that. Thank you. Um, I want us to kind of my mom's in the background telling me that I need to make it that I need to hurry up. So like,
Very
make
good.
sure we
Again,
get along. But I'm loving this. I'm just so happy right now. Um, so I'm gonna maybe take out some of the questions and just get to some of the ones that I really, really want us to get to. Is that okay with you?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. Um, so the intersection of policy and mental health, what policy changes would you advocate for in order to improve mental health outcomes for immigrants?
Okay, just a wish list. Okay, I have a whole wish list. I mean, I think the policy changes for mental health outcomes, I think would have to do with livable wage, is it, or universal basic income, whatever that looks like, but a more equitable society. Um, access to reproductive health and reproductive rights. I mean, I think anything that falls under the umbrella of improving people's quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
My answer to policy, anything that's under attack right now, uh, that we're seeing the dismantling of different institutions, I think anything almost under that umbrella is how I see mental health. The advocacy for mental health for me isn't, um, it can be high, definitely. I mean, when you get to the details, yes. Do we have access to interpreters? Right? Are we making licensure easier for people who don't come from generational wealth, who are not English, like who don't speak English as a first language, but speak another language, or who are a psychiatrist back in their home country in Afghanistan, and then they get here and they could work in another position, but they're hired to work in something that doesn't fully use their skills and their knowledge. So I think part of it is our mental health care system is very much privileges. Um, I think people who come from money and people who look and speak a certain way. And it took me a long time, right? I sometimes I feel like I'm a parrot, right? Like I've learned to speak the language and move in the ways that that have brought us both here. And I wish I wish I didn't have to do that, if that makes sense. Like I wish that other people had access. So I think when I think of mental health policy changes, it's the greater, the typical social worker, but I know, but it's like the person environment, it's the greater environment, but it's also like who is allowed in the profession. And
Yes.
also, do we need everything to be professionalized? And can what supports do people need without it having to be as professionalized? Because I think, yeah, it privileges me in a lot of ways. It privileges a lot of people who um, yeah, I mean, I have thoughts and reflections to share on this, but could this interview, um, who do we invite? Who do we, center? And I struggle with that too. Of like, I fought my way in the system, but I struggle with that existing. So anyway, I'm rambling, but I think, yeah, I think a lot about this. I don't have a clear answer, but um, it's a good question.
Can you speak to while we're in this theme, can you speak to what are barriers within the immigrant community, within the immigrant community that may be preventing members of the immigrant community from seeking help for mental health?
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely, the experience of grief is a human experience, right? The experience of loss and fear, those are human experiences. But the way that it's conceptualized, it's DSMized, right? The one-on-one sitting together, the reframing the thoughts, the let's contract on these goals, all the things that I do, but also all the things that I'm like, ooh, I don't know, right? Like that the mental health system it can and does benefit, right? And offers support to some. But I think overall it's like a mismatch, I think, for what different communities need. It was designed with whiteness in mind, and it's funded with whiteness in mind, and it's so yeah. I don't know. I think
I love how you said that there's these two beautiful sisters that I have taken their dance workshops, and their slogan is "We heal different."
mm-hmm.
And sometimes we do. I really resonate with that. And I know that at many past agencies where I've worked, I've had to be like the only Black person, the only Spanish speaking person, and the only person really speaking truth to power. And I also kind of resent how people leave that up to Black women to kind of like speak our mind. But we will, but it's exhausting. And I've had to tell certain agencies like, y'all may feel like this is a trauma-informed environment, but it's not.
It's not
Not
Trump.
for it, yeah, it's intimidating. It's
Right.
scary.
Right.
It's like, what's that movie? What was that
Get
movie?
out. Sorry. That's
Thank you. Get Out.
I
It's
knew
very
immediately.
Get Out. It's
Right.
get me get out. It's like we
Right.
don't feel safe like that all the time. Yes, sometimes we do want peace and quiet, but like I tell them, like, especially in Oakland, put some tunes on so that when people come in, there's a little vibe, that
Right.
helps people feel relaxed. Have some snacks out, have
Right.
water, juice, just put some color on the wall, you know.
Right. Right.
Ooh. But yeah, it can be very intense. Um, and I'm just really loving this. Okay, so let me move quickly. Um, so can you speak to coping with the psychological violence of racism?
In terms of working with clients, like how that,
Mm-hmm.
you
Or
know,
maybe, do you want me to not say coping? How should I supporting clients who are dealing with the psychological and physical impact of racism?
I think the reason I struggled is not this time, not the word coping, but I think sometimes people, when I worked with clients, often I had moments where I would say, do I tell this 18-year-old young Black man, right, from a country in Africa that what he experienced sounds a lot like racism? Is it my place to name it, right? Um, so I think that's what I encountered is I would hear of interactions and I would say, oh, that sounds like it's racism. But I think earlier on we talked about that's also why racism is so painful and like also confusing. Gaslighting is, wait, is it because I looked like I was tired? Or, oh, maybe it was because I wore that outfit, right? There's this it built in. And so I always struggle with that. But I think people sharing history sharing information, sharing your own reflections, but not telling someone what their experience is. But that sounds a lot to me like you may have experience. And the person can say, no, that's not right. People are allowed their own interpretation. But I think that one is so challenging. Yeah, but that's kind of how I would say it. I'm looking at the time where it, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, the next one is hope and future. So, despite the challenges that African immigrants face and many immigrants under the current administration and beyond, what gives you hope? What are some of the strengths you see in your clients and remind you of the resilience of Black immigrant communities?
Well, I would say in terms of hope, I'm speaking nebulously. I'm saying a relative because in case they see this, and I'm like, you didn't get my permission. But I would say I have a close relative who says that they have outlived a number of governments, right?
Mm,
And so I think the acknowledgement that there's a lot of, and I've seen that also when people speak about the experience of being African American or Black more broadly in the US, but specifically African American, of like how much has been endured and how much has been survived. And so putting this into context is its own resiliency, with the acknowledgement that it's just unjust and sad that one community, that one skin color has to be called upon to be resilient over and over again. But I think I see that as the hope, and I think the strength is also the capacity to look when it's accessible. The capacity to look past present hopelessness, um, because that hopefully is, if history is accurate, that's often proven to be temporary. And so that's my hope, but it changes. There's also room for hopelessness too. I think that's also okay.
Oh,
So I don't want to impose, right?
that
Because
was
it's very,
powerful.
yeah. So I think it's also okay to feel hopeless and despair because out of that comes something else. So
I like that. You know, my mom, she's called me, what did she say? She's like, you're, how did she put it? You're a toxic optimist.
you're like, thank you.
And I was like, "Ooh, okay. No, but I like that. I like there can be room for hopelessness because the reality is that there is a lot and we have to make that space.
Right.
Okay, great. So bridging the elders and the youth. It's not uncommon for children of African immigrant parents to become disillusioned with the very dream their parents left Africa in pursuit of. Sometimes this disillusionment can create tension between the generations. What tools do you suggest families engage to foster greater understanding and trust between the different generations?
This one may not be that practical, but sometimes I think of, when people talk about take your children to work day, but doing that, right? Take your parent to school day, take your take your whatever, that vice versa, but that exchange, because what happens is I think parents come with an idea, an ideal actually of what
Mhm.
America represents. And then their children experience the reality of America. And the parents hold on really sometimes really rigidly to the ideal of the homeland that was left, right? Very
Right.
much realized for sometimes neglecting parts of culture that sometimes are also harmful and can be oppressive.
Yes.
So I think when I think the children of immigrants hold the duality of that sometimes of seeing that. And so, I think storytelling, I love hearing stories and sharing stories, but I think if parents can share stories um, of what they've experienced, um, I think, yeah, I think storytelling for me is the biggest one. Um, and an
Mm.
acknowledge, and because then that's how you get to understanding, what it was like for your parent who maybe was very outspoken in their home country and then in the US was silent because they couldn't articulate their thoughts in the same way or given
Right.
audience, right? And then for the youth, what is that like to know that part of your parents' experience, or What is it for the parent to understand what it's like to be maybe bullied because you don't dress a certain way?
Right.
Um, so I think if there's any space for dialogue um, and storytelling is a one thing that comes to mind.
I love that. So basically talking to
Talking,
each other
yeah,
and including,
yeah.
um, I could go into my own little experience, but I do feel that older generations, they oftentimes went through so much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just straight up abuse, like
So
a
yeah,
lot of,
I think it was just straight up abuse. Yeah, some
right,
stuff you hear, you're like, oh,
right. And so it's kind of like there's sometimes older generations will kind of minimize
mm-hmm,
experiences and
mm-hmm.
definitely people younger than us. And it's kind of like, well, they'll do this thing where it's kind of like, well, you have it so easy. Why are you? But it's so nuanced. And I think also younger people will be dismissive of older people too. So I like the conversation piece that you're advocating and obviously talking is great, discussion. So healing and community resistance, we only have this is our last two. So seeking therapy and mental health support in general can still be taboo for a lot of immigrant families and individuals and just people in general. We've also seen an increase of African women and African men dying by suicide in recent years. These individuals have been both American citizens with quote unquote promising futures and also undocumented individuals with limited means. What barriers might be hindering immigrant communities from seeking mental health support when they're in a suicidal crisis?
A few things, and I think again, as I share this with caution, right, that I'm speaking from as one person, so there's my
Right,
diversity of experiences, but I would say definitely the stigma, and that may not be right. I mean, that's not unique to immigrant communities, but imagine, maybe you live in a neighborhood where 30 people, know your aunt in a different country, right? There's that level of there's less anonymity with tighter knit communities, and I'm sure that's different, right? That's not unique to immigrants, but that can be when you're in a different country. It feels more it might feel more intense.
right,
Um, I think the stigma for sure, but then also what happens if you tell a provider that you're feeling suicidal? Do you get sent to you know, do you get sent to a hospital? You end up with a hospital bill that you come out of and not feeling any better or any more understood. So I think it's also, um, our systems. I'm not going to say it as a question. I think our systems aren't supportive of people who are experiencing suicidality, and I think the conditions of life also aren't really supportive of people wanting to live. For many people, right? So I think the barriers are many: human connection, human support, um, thoughtful professional support. Um, Better rights. I don't know. It reads like a wish list. I don't have a how to, but I think it's that wish list of, and also, um, yeah, I think having all that in place, but the stigma is definitely a big one.
yes, stigma. I think I've worked as a crisis counselor. I've worked on the 988 hotline. And I think that a lot of young people do fear shaming their family. They do fear being a burden, people in general, but I'm especially really concerned about the youth regarding this topic. I don't know if you remember in 2023 when they found the body of Johannes Kidane in the over the bridge in San Francisco. They found his body in the water. It could have been a suicide, not really sure, but a lot of people have, died by suicide using the Golden Gate Bridge. But for me, I just feel like I think that We have to, that's why I really like how you said we have to make room for hopelessness, because if you can make room for it, people can feel validated enough to still exist, even
Mm-hmm.
though they're not feeling hopeful,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it's then you're not holding the pressure to not only be feeling whatever you're feeling, whether it's extreme, grief or depression, but then also the need to perform success and the need to perform contentment and the need to perform your sacrifices were worth it. That's so much weight. And I think in some ways, this is a broad generalization, but I think some ways our communities are very, very intolerant of any kind of perception of failure.
Mm,
And so that combination of pressures, you cannot fail, then what do? You die, right? Because
right.
what room do you have to exist outside of that you're carrying the weight of your parents, of your elders perform. So I think oddly enough, I would say, yeah, room for hopelessness and maybe um, yeah, I just want to stay with that because I maybe that's where I am right now. Yeah, with
It's a
that.
lot of pressure. I love that you said that. Thank you. So this is the last question. It's called back home. So as African people, we often speak of back home with a mixture of nostalgia for the cultural and community, um, you know, just for the culture and community. And also for some, we also battle with this deep anger and grief about the political or economic situation, which caused us to leave back home. Um, so, as someone who lives with major depressive disorder, I can say that when I was living in Ethiopia for 3 months in a very tiny room, it was one of the healthiest moments of my life. And I would like for you to explore, I've heard that the mental health issues back home are not necessarily the same as the mental health issues in the diaspora. So, can you speak to that? Is there this kind of like idealization of back home? Is there an idealization of here? Like, what is that about?
I would say, can you hear the music in the background? By the way, Kula?
I cannot.
Okay, okay, it's wonderful, but um, I would say both. Actually, the way you put it at the end, there's idealization of home, and there's devaluing of home. There's
Mhm.
idealization of the U.S. and then also devaluing of aspects of the US. And sometimes some of it is true, and then sometimes it's a function of needing to deny or disavow certain aspects of your experience, your identity, in order to survive.
Mhm.
So if I can share like a memory I had visiting back home, right, with my mom, and there is an internet. Well, government doesn't allow internet, but there was no internet, so you don't Google Maps, right? And we were looking for a place, we couldn't find it, and it happened twice that two completely like total strangers spent like one person spent 20 minutes with us walking us somewhere. Another person walked us to the restaurant. We're like, well, you're here already. You want to just eat with us? She sat down, she ate with us 2 3 hours of her day. And when I think of that, but back home is also forced imprisonment. Back home, so it's like the multiplicity of things that are very cruel and dehumanizing, but it's also people who are very generous and very kind. But I often think of that experience of like, yeah, that's really much nicer than Google Maps, right? Like connecting with people, and I miss that. I think when I talk about it, I tear up too because it's such a it's yeah, it's sad to be away from that, I think. I didn't think I would. It's emotional because I think that's the part where you realize, oh, that's what's lost, right? With and then you also think of the people, right? That when you the things that you critique is because, gosh, I want those people to have comfort and to have stability and to have, you know. And it may not be my place to speak on their behalf, but it's a wish anyway. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. I didn't expect to tear up, but you did it somehow. So I think that's what when I think of back home, that's what I think and what I feel.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I remember being in Senegal with my mom and auntie and my niece, and we got stranded on the beach in a car. And like heck of people just came out of nowhere and that tire was changed and they pushed us out the
Yes.
sand. I'm like, no need for AAA
Yes.
out here. It's just,
Yes.
it was so beautiful. I want to ask you about self-care that you do for yourself. One of my forms of self-care is family, spending time with family and also cooking. I really love cooking. And I want to share this book with you. I've been recently going through this book. It's called Sheba's Kitchen, and it's written by a sister named Adiam Sigaye, and she has her own restaurant in Oakland called Mela's Bistro. And
Nice.
this is like a recipe of Tigrinian recipes, and it's the bomb. I just love making stuff out of here, and I've obviously eaten a lot of this stuff, but I never knew the Tigrinya words for it. I
Yeah.
knew the
Yeah.
Amharic words, so it's just amazing seeing everything. This is my favorite dish to
Oh,
cook.
beautiful. Yeah. You've been making it?
Yes. Um, I love to eat and cook. What are
No.
things that you do for yourself for self-care?
You know, as you're saying that, I'm looking up the name, but of the artist. But one like this painting behind me, I don't want to
It's
drop everything on
beautiful.
the
I've been
floor.
looking at it.
Is I'll have to share his name with you, but he's an artist from Ethiopia. But I think art, um, definitely music, my neighbors, beautiful food, writing stories. I'd like to say I'm not like the most physically active, but I think running I really enjoy. I'm not like the Ethiopian marathoners. I'm not going to win anything, but I like to run. So yeah, I think that I would say that's my self care. And I think also with this, I realized I know I'm putting it at the end, but I've talked so much about my Eritrean ancestry. But I was born. That's why that painting it's from Addis, right, which is the capital of Ethiopia. That's where I was born. That's where my family lived. And so I also want to give like a special nod to like Ethiopia because that also has been our home.
Of
Um,
course.
fractured histories and everything, right? The people are people. And so I also appreciate that's been also where I've lived and was raised. So yeah, that's
Shout
my,
out to Ethiopia. That's so much love. One of my closest friends is like you. She's Eritrean, but born and raised in Ethiopia. We went to UC Berkeley together. She's brilliant, phenomenal woman. There's a name for you all, right?
oh
What is the name
yeah,
for you all?
yeah. It, yeah,
Amiche?
it's Habasha. But Amiche is a
No.
very specific term for people who went from Ethiopia to Asmara and like I think in the context of the conflict. And
Okay.
then Habesha is more broadly collective. That also has its own, I don't know the details of it, it has its own controversies, but that's
Really?
commonly
Okay.
used. But
Yes, I know.
nothing is without controversy. But
Our existence isn't without controversy, so I'm okay with it. Yeah, I think I was thinking more of the Amiche. Maybe it's a
yes,
different word
Amiche is specific. Yeah, it's like
for like
it is
Eritreans who
Eritrean.
were born in Ethiopia.
Mhm. And then went to Asma or went to Eritrea. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because they didn't, I think they either didn't, partly they were in Ethiopia, but also they didn't speak Tigrinya in the same way. I don't know. I actually,
Right.
it's not my experience, but I know that that's kind of what the nickname or the language was.
Okay, I love that.
You know all the words.
Girl, being from the Bay, we got it all in the Bay Area. I have one question for you. My godmother, I've kind of taken her on as my godmom. She's amazing. We just fell in love with each other, and I just love her so much. Her name's Mama Rose. She's
Yeah.
Eritrean. She's an amazing mother, grandmother. She's fluent in Tigrinya, Amarinya, and Italian. I told her I would be meeting with you today. And so she has a question for you. She has
Oh,
like all
okay.
these beautiful grandbabies. And, she's just entering a new phase of her life. So she said she wanted me to ask you a question regarding, she would like to know more about postpartum depression and like tools for that.
It's something that not personally familiar with, and I don't have a lot of experience working with postpartum depression. And I can share what I've known communally and culturally. I mean, I know there's, talk to your OBGYN, talk to your doctor, therapy, medication, support groups. I know that. I haven't worked with postpartum depression specifically, but that doesn't mean also that I can't share what I know without
Mhm.
claiming expertise. Uh, I think when I remember um, older sisters, family members, broadly, family friends who had babies, there was always the house was always crowded. There was
Mhm.
always a specific, like, very, there's a specific food that people eat in general, but it's specific for women who've just given birth. It's very heavy and fatty, and you're supposed to get plump, right? Or plumper, right? Like, so there
Yummy.
was this, yeah, there's
I love
visiting.
that.
Yeah. So and I've had other friends talk about, people didn't call it postpartum depression, but there have been traditions of women gathering and staying with you for weeks at a time, for helping you, for celebrating with you, for helping, like, what do you do with this creature, right? What do you do with this baby? I don't know what to do, right? So I think before there was lactation consultants and postpartum therapists and all this, there from what I witnessed as a child growing up, I was always struck by how full the house was and how it was like mothers helping mothers. And so, you know, I don't have the clinical training in that regard, but I do have the memories and the stories and the lived experience of witnessing women showing up for each other.
And
And
that's just as valid, if not
yeah,
even more,
yeah.
because these traditions have carried us for way before the DSM was ever even invented.
Right, right. And before the language of postpartum, but knowing
Exactly.
that there was a need for a safety net
Yeah.
for new parents, for new parents.
There's so much strength in our culture and there's so much wisdom in it, and I think right now as Black people, people of the African diaspora, we're really taking charge of our own healing and we're not just leaving it in the hands of the experts anymore because we're seeing that it's been failing us and we have to insert our own voice, our own practice. That's why I really appreciate you, Kissu, for making sacrifice to commit to become a licensed therapist, have your own private practice, give consultations, spend time with people like me. That's just it's such a big offering. And if you could just leave us with something like, I don't know, a proverb or just something, I don't know, anything that comes from your heart, but I want you to say it in Tigrinya and then say it in English.
Oh no, I don't know if I have that.
See, whatever's on your heart, whatever's on your heart.
I can't think of anything in Tigrinya because I grew like I speak it at home, so that if I try to speak
Okay.
it like in front of people, I'm like, ooh, I like apples, right? But
You speak Amharic too then, right?
understand.
Okay.
I've been caught. I've claimed I can speak, and then people are like, I'm like, no, I understand, but I forgot how to speak it. But I think um, there was something that I heard recently, and I don't know it again, and I can't repeat it into Gringa. I recognize it if I heard it, but I
Mm,
heard it with you too. There's a proverb that I really like about. It always reminds me of like the spirit of reciprocity. Of if someone does good for you, you repeat their name or you share their name. Um,
mm,
or you compensate them in some way. And so I think about that often of like or even like a phrase like thank you, like Hiranyele means like it's kind of a wish that this would last longer, or
Oh.
may this last longer, right? Something I might not be getting it exactly right, but that's the spirit of it. And so I think I would like to offer that to you for these really thoughtful and engaging and challenging questions, and just the spirit and energy that you brought to this. And so I think that is my, and whoever else, right, engages with us by watching this or participating, to also thank them. And then, you know, behind the scenes, right, cool, I was complaining about my neighbor's music because it can't work. It can't. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky, right? And privileged to have to hear this beautiful music that another community is having, because they're having a wedding, they're celebrating a wedding. And so, yeah, I think it feels very connected to just all of us being in it together. And sometimes it's loud, but it's beautiful.
Yes, we are loud. We take up
We're loud.
space. And that's okay. It's so exhausting. You know, I can be myself with you, but when I'm in other settings, I find myself very toned down. I find myself very much policing my voice, my tone, all these things. And it just feels so refreshing to be able to just relax and be myself, you know, and not have to worry about, oh, am I going to scare them if I say this way or that way? So honestly, it's been so refreshing to just speak with you. I hope this is the first of many. I really look forward to just continually following your work, Kissu. Bless you for all the work you're doing supporting immigrants of all backgrounds in Cali and Texas. And I'm just wishing for God to cover you and all your clients during this time. And thank you for doing this work that is health, but it's health work, but it's also inherently political. And I think it kind of always has been. And I think this is why I take my hat off to therapists and social workers who choose to take up this cause.
Thank you so much. You've said that so beautifully. Ditto to you as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to stop the recording and then we can just check in. Well, I can stop it after because we might have some little gems in here. How did you feel about that?
Good. I felt good. I appreciated the energy. I appreciated like you sharing about yourself, sharing about your own connections, bringing in people who are not in here with us physically, but who are in here with us too. Right. So I appreciated that.